Contribution by Ricky Harnett. After all these years, the one thing that remains is our friendship. In the March 2019, I was dancing in a packed private room at a nightclub somewhere in Essex. The DJ dropped the track Let Me Love You For Tonight by Korea and the place went mental. I looked over to see Carlton Leach busting some moves with his beautiful daughters. We clocked each other and grinned like we'd been transported back to 1989. Carlton's bird at the time had invited close friends and family to celebrate his birthday. I couldn't help thinking that him reaching the ripe old age of 60 despite living the kind of life he has was some bloody achievement. It had been a hell of a journey since the first time we met, all those years ago at Cat's Strip Club in Basildon. I don't mind admitting that, back then, I was quietly shitting myself, having just read his book, Muscle. I was getting ready to play him in the upcoming film, Rise of the Foot Soldier, and the weight of responsibility had started to feel very heavy indeed. I'd been training hard for it, but I was still probably at least 2 stone underweight, and the dark, violent world that Carlton operated in seemed like another universe to me. He knew straight away that I was a bit out of my depth, and maybe that's why, the next morning, he dragged me off his sofa and took me and my raging hangover with him on a bit of work. In for a penny, as they say, and from that moment our friendship grew. I started to pack on as much weight as I could, legally, bench pressing up to 100 kilograms, my neck widening to the size of a tree trunk. Before the film came out, I'd been invited, along with Carlton, to a private viewing in a small screening room in Soho. I remember sitting next to him in that dark room, sweating, waiting for the film to start. I thought to myself, what if he hates it? The film ended, the credits rolling to the song Heaven Knows, and we made our way out into the bright sunshine of central London. Carlton was uncharacteristically quiet. To be fair, it must have been fucking weird for him. It's not every day you see your life projected on a big screen, having to watch the harrowing moment when one of your good mates was brutally executed in a gangland killing. Well done, he said quietly, still processing it. I think I said, cheers, and we both stood there in silence in the hustle and bustle of the busy Soho street. The film premiered in Leicester Square and had a limited release at the cinemas, but it was on DVD that it really blew up, doing huge numbers in the UK. I'm not sure why the British public went for it in the way they did, because it didn't have any massive stars in it, and the story of the Rettendon murders had already been told a few years before in a pretty good film called Essex Boys. The snobby film critics, who seem to enjoy sticking the boot into these kinds of films, tried their best, but even they couldn't stop Rise of the Foot Soldier being a runaway success. And judging by the amount of people who still stop me in the street, I'd say that it's definitely regarded as a cult British film. I remember thinking at the time that it might change my life in some way. I'd been acting since the age of 10 and had done all right in teledramas and films like 28 Days Later, but this felt different because I was now a leading man, despite being a short ass and not having the looks of Tom Hardy. I thought maybe this would open a few doors for both me and Carlton, and I guess it sort of did, but there was no first-class ticket to Hollywood. That's the acting game for you. The sad thing was that I'd fallen out with the production company who made the film, which was a shame because otherwise Rise of the Foot Soldier Part 2 probably would have happened back in 2009. I went back to being a jobbing actor, and Carlton, along with his usual line of work, had started doing one-man shows up and down the country. Having been a stage actor, I knew how nerve-wracking it can be to go out in front of a live audience, but I was surprised just how well Carlton had taken to it. I suppose the bottle needed to battle it out on the terraces throughout the 80s had stood him in good stead. He invited me to one show in some seaside town up north. Carlton, myself, and West Ham's Steve flew up together. It felt a bit like being on an away day with the ICF. We were picked up at the airport by some hard-looking geezers and driven to a pretty rough-looking boozer on the seafront. It was a Saturday night. The town was heaving with pissed-up hen and stag parties, and by the time Carlton's show had started, the pub was packed with every local bare-knuckle fighter and his son. It went well though, and the night passed without any ag. That was until I stepped outside into the freezing cold for a fag, and saw 3 Old Bill trying to pepper spray some lump on the ground, while these northern bridesmaids were screaming and swinging for anyone that moved. It was a bit lively, to say the least, and I was thankful to the hand that reached out and pulled me back into the relative sanctuary of the pub. I went to a few more shows after that, but eventually packed it in for my own health. There were a couple of years where Carlton and I didn't see each other much, but he'd always pick up the phone if I called. I knew it niggled him that no one else involved in the first film had bothered to see how he was. It seems that everyone's your mate when they're making money. But when it dries up, that's when you see who your real friends are. We'd spoken about the idea of doing a sequel because even though the first film was good, if you think about it, Carlton's character sort of disappears in the second half. You follow him working his way up from the terraces to the clubs and deeper into the underworld, and then he's gone. It's almost like two separate films, with a bit of him smashing things up at the end. I was really interested in what had happened to Carlton after the murders, how the trauma had impacted not only him but his family, and how he struggled to carry on grafting in the underworld because people had turned their back on him, fearing he might be next. Carlton and I both knew that if we were going to get the film off the ground, it was going to take a monumental effort. Because we weren't on good terms with the producers of the first film, we knew it was going to cause fucking bedlam, but that was part of the challenge. I could write a book about the obstacles we faced making that film, but life's too short. Let's just say it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. But in hindsight, we won more battles than we lost, such as bringing Coralie Rose back to play Denny and persuading Luke Mabley to give up the sunshine of DELA and come over to freezing Essex to deliver his cracking performance as Sean. I'm proud of all of the actors and crew that went above and beyond to make Rise of the Foot Soldier Part 2 the best film it could possibly be. The fact that it ended up featuring top tunes like Liquid's Sweet Harmony, Baby D's Let Me Be Your Fantasy, and Josh Wink's Don't Laugh is another example of how Carlton and I stood firm amongst all the ag. I'm not saying the film's perfect, but we put our hearts and souls into it, and it went on to win Best British Film at the National Film Awards, voted for by the public, which meant a lot to us. We left it open at the end to tee up the trilogy, but the producers decided to do the prequel instead. To be honest, I don't really recognize the franchise now, but good luck to them. After all these years, the one thing that remains is our friendship. I think back to Carlton's 60th birthday party and who had turned up that night to celebrate. Real family and friends, good people that have shown loyalty to him throughout the years, and it was an honor to be part of that.